The ship they use in this book is basically two Hammerships stuck together along the gravity plane, like at the keel, to make a double Hammership, and that's kind of fun. And it goes into both like why this is cool, but also the downside of like you can never take it anywhere near a planet because everything on the bottom would fall off.
Welcome to the Character Sheet, comicbook.com's official home for all things fantasy and tabletop. I am the host of the channel, Christian Hoffer, and today I'm joined by a special guest. I'm joined by Django Wexler, who is the writer of an upcoming novel about one of my favorite topics, and that is Spelljammer. So Django, welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
We're here to talk about your upcoming Dungeons and Dragons novel. Of course, you know, Spelljammer, not your typical Dungeons and Dragons setting. It's one of the more fantastical ones they have. So my first question for you is, what's your background in Spelljammer?
Oh, I go way back with Spelljammer. I have character sheets from when I was about 10 years old. Doing Spelljammer for the first time. I mean, when we did D&D, we got all our stuff from like a bargain bin at the local shop. So I think it was a little after Spelljammer first released. But you know, my character owned fleets of ships and giant space castles because that was awesome. Hello, cat.
Yes. Dexter is making a rare appearance on the channel today. So
that's like a "he's behind me, isn't he" moment there.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I've been a D&D guy basically my whole life. I mean, other RPGs later, but D&D was where I started, and I've been playing it for a long time. Somewhat less so now in the sad days of adulthood and children. Finding time is always difficult, but it's always been a thing that I did, and it kind of led directly into writing. I feel like I started writing when I didn't get enough of what I needed from D&D. The players kept not doing what I wanted them to do. I was always the DM most of the time.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about Spelljammer's Memory Wake? Like just a top level, who's it about? Where does it take place in beyond, you know, Spelljammer? Things like that.
So it takes place in a crystal sphere. Well, I guess it's not a crystal sphere. God, you can tell I'm an old school Spelljammer guy, right? It takes place in a system. They're under crystal spheres. And that I kind of made up because I think for me, one of the joys of Spelljammer was that kind of create your own thing, but it's also like part of a larger universe. Like when Spelljammer first came out, the idea that it's like, you can, you know, put your campaign world in it, but then your characters can like fly to the Forgotten Realms was always like one of the coolest parts for me. So it's in the system with no planets. The only habitable planet was destroyed. So it's just people living on asteroids in this kind of distributed state, which obviously makes it a great system to do some space piracy. And so we have Axia, who grew up on a little farming asteroid. She's kind of an amnesiac, so she's lost her memory for unexplained reasons. And her life is upended when people turn up and tell her that she looks exactly like a famous pirate captain called Blacktongue who has gone missing. And so various people sort of assume that that's who she is, that she's secretly in hiding, and in part in self-defense, she has to go and assume the role of Blacktongue to her old pirate crew to get some answers and, you know, hopefully not end up getting killed by bounty hunters and so
on. So now I have to ask the obvious question. Is Axia actually Blacktongue, or do we have
to...
You
have to read the book. That's definitely a spoiler.
Yeah, you know, I always gotta try to get those answers in there. I'll
tell you, it's complicated. It's not a simple story. It's not just like, oh yes, you secretly got bonked on the head and lost your memory.
You mean to tell me that a Dungeons and Dragons novel has a complicated explanation for something? I'm shocked.
Yeah. You know, otherwise the campaign would be over very quickly.
What sort of inspirations did you draw upon when you were writing the novel?
There's a bunch of different sources. Some of it is, obviously my own D&D stuff of ages past of blessed memory is a lot of that is in there. There's probably a little bit from the old series of Spelljammer books, which I still have. The 6-book series that they put out back in the day, which was not like 100% great, but it was beloved of me in my teenage years. Yes, Teldon Moore, as the producer told me in the chat, his was the protagonist, and he donned the cloak and went to become captain of the Spelljammer itself. So that stuff is in there. I worked doing some work for Wizards of the Coast, like producing some sketches of like example characters at one point, and a lot of that stuff didn't get into print, but they liked it, and so they were like, hey, can you work some of that stuff in? And so some of the characters are from these kind of like early 5th edition example parties we did, which is a lot of fun. Nia and Corey, who are the two sort of pirate lieutenants who recruit Axia to become to take this role as Blacktongue. They're part of that stuff. And then, a lot of it's just stuff that I like, when you're doing Spelljammer, and I'm like, well, I'll probably only get one shot at this. I don't know if we're going to do war books or whatever, but it's got to be space pirates because that's like the coolest thing you can possibly do. So there's a lot of that in there. Just stuff that I thought was awesome.
Touching on the previous Spelljammer books, that was one of the questions I was actually going to ask you about was, are there any Easter eggs involving the Cloakmaster cycle?
I think there's a couple. I don't know if I'd call it, I don't think they're explicit Easter eggs. For one thing, the last time I read the Cloakmaster cycle was probably 25 years ago. So I didn't reread them in preparation for this. I reread a lot of, there's more Easter eggs from the original Spelljammer products. There's a few things that didn't sort of make the jump from the old books to the new books that are in there. Because they were in like obscure supplements or something. And I did read all of those before diving back into this, and so there's some little bits and nods there. More than so, some of that also turns up from the Teldon Moore books.
Okay. And kind of like touching, you brought up that not all the Spelljammer lore from the original edition made it through into what we've seen in the 5th edition box set. One of the comments about the Spelljammer box set is it's very wide open. They give an example system in the adventure, and they basically point out, here's where a couple of the different other planes of existence that you're familiar with, here's where they were located at, but otherwise it's basically left up to the DM to come up with how you want to build out your campaign. Having that framework, does that make it easier to write a book, when you're doing like a licensed book like a Spelljammer book, or does it make it a little bit harder because you have to kind of, you I mean, obviously you're referencing the old Spelljammer stuff, but the new Spelljammer book, you only have 3 I think 128 page books or something like that to go off of.
It probably makes it easier on balance, because I'm used to just making up stuff. Like when I write a book that's not a licensed book, that's kind of what I do. So for me, that's easy. We had talked about me doing a D&D book before, but I really didn't want to do one set in like Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or one of the big established settings, just because I think that would be so much harder to do justice to the lore. Not so much the rules of the thing, that's kind of easy to work around, but there's just thousands and thousands of pages, and I would always feel like I haven't caught up on 20 years of novels and all that stuff, and I would always feel like I was doing sort of a disservice. But in Spelljammer, it's great. I can just be like, okay, here's a setting, like it's a new setting, but it's also kind of like connected to the old setting. It's like if you could set something in the Forgotten Realms world, but just kind of like drop a new continent in and be like, yeah, and there's characters from the old continent, but like we're not going to worry too much about their politics. But like that doesn't work because the world is of a fixed size. But in Spelljammer, that's exactly what happens, right? And so that's really nice. It helps. Like obviously, I'd love more Spelljammer content, but like that's true of anything I love. I always want more content. There's no amount they can make that would satisfy me.
I have to ask, do you have like a favorite Spelljammer ship? Do you have any like a particular bit of Spelljammer lore that you've just like loved since your first run through with Spelljammer?
Favorite ship? There's a lot of cool ships. I mean, the classic Nautiloid is so cool looking. That illustration from the original and its sort of descendants are just a big part of what kind of sold me on that setting to begin with. And they've kept up that kind of like the awesome artwork as it goes through. So that's a lot of fun. The ship they use in this book is basically 2 Hammerships stuck together along the gravity plane, like at the keel, to make a double Hammership. And that's kind of fun. And it goes into both like why this is cool, but also the downside of like you can never take it anywhere near a planet because everything on the bottom would fall off. Dealing with the gravity and the gravity planes is a lot of fun in this. There's a bit where I was doing little diagrams with my hands because like the Hammership rams another ship amidships but twisted, which since it's heavier, it takes over the gravity plane, which causes everyone on the other ship to fall towards the center, and then you board and demolish them.
That does kind of touch on like one other question I wanted to ask you about was when writing a book set in Spelljammer was especially this is a as you mentioned this setting has no planets, the one that you made for the book. Were there any like weird bits that you had to kind of like work out, like how for instance, like how does a planetless system in Spelljammer work, or was there any like weird like internal consistencies that you had to like figure out before you really delved into the story?
It's less of a problem with Spelljammer in some ways, because like if this were like a hard SF novel, there would be a little more to deal with, but like because you have magic to fall back on, it makes things work a lot better. There's always a wizard did it. But in particular, like a lot of the sort of basic problems can be solved with creative applications of the various spell lists. And so you can do a lot of stuff with that. That helps. Honestly, the biggest challenge, I had to write the book with the new player's handbook open next to me because probably the bulk of my gaming was in 3.5, and so I kept like misremembering things because I haven't actually like run a campaign in 5e yet. And so I'm sitting there with the spell lists being like, okay, what does a wizard have memorized today? And, who's doing this? And, does that still work the way I remember it working?
No, I totally understand. The number of times I've called for fortitude saving throws in a 5e campaign, it's like, oh, that doesn't exist anymore. Never, you know what I mean. Come up, go on, figure it out.
It's a familiar problem, like as someone who plays D&D and like Warhammer and a bunch of other games that have all been through like 17 editions. You get used to trying to rewire your brain every 5 years.
I do have a very specific Spelljammer question that we touched about before we started recording, and that is of course the hippo people in Spelljammer. How do you pronounce that group's name?
I say GIF, like all right-thinking people, but according to the new lore, there's a group of evil people who say GIF.
And it's like a 50-50 split. Does that play at all into your novel?
I think there's an aside that mentions it. I forget if that made it through editing, but I remember writing one. But no, it's not a huge issue. We do definitely have some GIF characters. There's a lot of really fun GIF characters. And there's some neat Easter eggs there. But
final question, because if I'm not mistaken, this is your first Dungeons and Dragons novel, correct?
It is. It is my first Dungeons and Dragons novel.
Is, you mentioned that you didn't really want to jump into like an established setting to write a D&D novel. Would there be another D&D setting that you would want to write a D&D novel in?
I mean, I do Planescape for sure. Coming from around the same time, Planescape was also sort of deeply formative for me. Yeah. That, to be clear, that's not like a thing that's happening. That's just like me being like,
yeah. No.
But no, those are the two main ones. If I did another D&D novel outside of that, it would probably be in some kind of custom world. I've been homebrewing my world since time immemorial, and so for me, that's always like half the fun. And so that's kind of what I'd want.
Okay. Well, last question for you. I always like to end these type of interviews with, why should folks pick up Memories Wake when it comes out next month?
Oof. Well, obviously the first reason is if you love Spelljammer, because I love Spelljammer, and so I had a blast writing it, and I'm hoping that will be, clear in the text that it's just so much fun. I love that universe. I love working with it. I love the kind of juxtaposition of kind of traditional D&D tropes with like traditional space opera tropes is a lot of fun. And I love these characters. We haven't gone into that much, but like this story with Axia is so much fun. And they get to go to a bunch of really fun locations. That's sort of one of the things I love about Spelljammer is like, here's the place that's built out of the bones of dead mega predators, and here's the place that's like literally a giant plant floating in space.
Yeah, no, I mean that's one of the best parts about Spelljammer is
that sort of embraces the weirdness of it.
Yeah, no, and that kind of tracks. I do have one other question. Before we let you go, I keep on saying one more question. I think I've done that to you like 3 times. Is there a particular character that you think is going to be a fan favorite?
Oh, I like Nia and Corey. They're like these 2 lieutenants, they're girlfriends, and they just kind of like, one of them's a cleric and the other one's a warlock, and they kind of bicker like an old married couple, because I guess they are an old married couple. And it's so much fun to write. They're constantly like running down, the warlock is constantly complaining about the cleric's faith in a god, and the cleric is constantly complaining about her deals with the devil and so on. Not literally the devil. It's actually kind of an unrevealed thing in the story, so I won't go into it, but like I know.
Fair enough. Well, that sounds right there is one reason to pick up this book right there. So, well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a blast. Like I said, always love talking about Spelljammer on the channel. We don't get to do it enough.
Can I pitch a couple things?
Yes, please.
If you go to my website, which is djangowexler.com, and sign up for my newsletter, you can get for free a novella called Horde, which is about an adventuring party that kills a dragon and finds a giant pile of treasure, and then spends the rest of the book trying to get it back to civilization after they find out that, shockingly, gold is really heavy. And so I think your audience might appreciate that. And then I also have a book out as of, whenever, I don't know when this is going to air, but sometime before that, called How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying, which is about a woman who's stuck in a time loop trying to save the kingdom, and eventually gives up and decides, if you can't beat him, join him. And so she decides to become the Dark Lord instead. and that has a lot of like tabletop RPG and video game humor in it. It's a sort of dark comedy. So people who are into D&D stuff might also dig that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for pointing that out. Obviously, is there anywhere else that people can find, you on the internet, or besides your website?
My website's the best place for like book stuff. I mostly hang out on Blue Sky these days as at Django Wexler. I'm still kind of on Twitter as at Django Wexler. Those are probably the best places to, catch me talking about whatever random stuff is on the internet.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Spelljammer Memories Wake comes out in June. So next month should still be accurate when we post this video. So be sure to check it out. It comes out in June. It's available wherever you buy books at. So support your local bookstore first and foremost. But if you don't have one of those, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, places like that will have it too. So.
Yes, if you happen to be in Redmond, Washington, I'll probably go to one of the locals and sign stuff. So check my Blue Sky or Twitter, and you can, if you want a signed copy.
Yeah, heck yeah. Okay, well, until next time, thank you so much for watching the channel. Be sure to do the likes and the subscribes and all the other things I'm supposed to say at the end of the YouTube video. Do all of that. So until next time.